The Battlefield franchise has some of the most satisfying sniping in all of first-person shooter history. A skilled player with a sniper rifle can be a menace on the battlefield, dealing a one-shot kill from any range and sometimes even powerful enough to take down a vehicle with a single bullet. But landing these shots requires a combination of skills that makes sniping a difficult task to master. In this video, I'll be sharing everything I know about sniping in Battlefield to help you improve your skills. We're going to be mostly focusing on Battlefield 4 since it's the most difficult game to snipe in out of the last few, but I'll also mention some specific mechanics to help you out if you want to master sniping in Battlefield 1 or 5 as well. Sorry Hardline, not that many people play you anymore. Since there's a lot of ground to cover across many topics, I broke this guide down into several parts so you can easily jump around and return to various sections. Our starting point will be choosing which sniper works the best for your desired playstyle. After choosing the right tool for the job, we need to understand the mechanics of sniping regarding how bullet drop and shot timing are affected by your distance to the target. With this knowledge, we can optimize our loadout with the best attachments for the situation at hand and learn to position ourselves and play around cover effectively, which will ultimately result in us becoming more difficult to kill. Of course, this only works if your aim is good, so I'll try to give you some tips on how to improve your aim along with some suggestions to optimize some important settings in the game. We'll finish today's video off by talking about how you can use the rest of your loadout effectively as well, mainly your gadgets and your sidearm. Let's start first with sniper rifle selection. In Battlefield games, each sniper rifle has a mix of important stats that determine how good it is for various situations. For example, in close quarters play, you might not care that much about bullet drop because it doesn't impact how you aim at those closer ranges. Instead, stats like RPM or how fast your gun shoots, or how many bullets are in a magazine and how fast you can reload might be more important stats to consider. For longer range sniping though, choosing a sniper with a slow bullet speed or extra bullet drop could make your job considerably more difficult. I found that the easiest way to look up all of these options at the same time is to check out an external resource. My current favorite is sim.gg. I've been using this site for many years to compare bullet velocities, magazine sizes, spread patterns, and much more. No advertisement or anything like that, I just find it to be an incredibly useful resource and I wanted to share it with you. For Battlefield 4, I really like having a high bullet speed sniper for anything past close quarters range. This means I'm looking at options like the CS-LR4, which shoots at 670 meters per second, which is tied for the fastest bullet speed of any BF4 sniper along with the JNG90. The M98B is also great at 650 meters per second with the added benefit of having a longer range before it hits the minimum damage numbers thanks to damage drop-off over distance. More on how that works in a bit. If you're going for extreme long-range sniping, the SRR-61 is also an interesting choice because they somehow figured out how to change the Earth's gravitational acceleration of 9.81 meters per second squared down to just 6. My old engineering professors are probably scratching their head at how that one works, but the result is that you don't need to compensate quite as much for bullet drop when you're aiming for those longer range shots. For closer range sniping, you can get away with a bit slower bullet speed, so you might prefer something like the M40A5, which has significantly faster rate of fire at 51 RPM. Also, keep in mind that when you shoot weapons in Battlefield 4, they'll show up on the minimap as an orange Dorito unless you have a suppressor on your rifle. However, adding one will drastically slow down the bullet velocity, which means that you need to lead your targets much more aggressively. In very close quarters, this might be a worthwhile trade-off, but probably not beyond 100 to 200 meters. It's important to remember that you can still be spotted manually even if you're rocking a suppressor. In Battlefield 1, things work a bit differently. They introduced the idea of a sweet spot into the game where you can kill with a single body shot within a particular range window for certain snipers. For example, on the SMLE Mark III, the sweet spot for a one-hit kill body shot is somewhere between 40 to 75 meters, while on the Martini Henry, the sweet spot starts a bit sooner at around 30 meters from the target. We'll talk in more depth later in the video about how body shots can kill in different situations. The bullet speed in Battlefield 1 is generally a bit faster than in Battlefield 4, which makes landing shots on moving targets much easier. Just pay attention to the bullet speed of whichever sniper you end up choosing. Battlefield 5 has what I consider to be probably the easiest sniping in all of the 3 Battlefield games mentioned here, and you can see why in the data. Bullet speeds got even faster, with some snipers hitting up to 900 meters per second. The bottom line is that you need to pick a sniper that matches what you want to accomplish with your playstyle and stick with it so you get a feel for how it performs on the battlefield. You need to understand exactly how much the bullets drop, how much you need to lead your target, how fast it can fire, and how long you need to wait between reloads. Speaking of reloads, did you know that there's actually a different timer for how long it takes to reload your weapon if you have a completely empty gun or one with a bullet left in the chamber? It's often helpful to take advantage of this faster tactical reload by not shooting every single bullet before reloading. When it comes to managing bullet drop and leading your target, there's a few important pieces of information to consider. Let's start with the bullet drop first because that's a bit easier to visualize. There are several ways to determine how far away you are from your target. The simplest way is to get a good estimate by taking a look at the closest objective point and do a bit of mental math to either add or subtract a bit of distance based on if your target is in front or behind this reference point. Battlefield 4 also has some gadgets and attachments that can make this process a bit easier. For example, you can add the rangefinder attachment onto your sniper, which gives you a readout of how far the object you're aiming at is from your current position. For long range sniping, this is incredibly helpful. If you don't want to use a rangefinder on the rifle itself, you can also use the Portable Laser Designator gadget, or PLD for short, to accomplish the same idea. Point this at an enemy or the ground nearby and get a readout of the distance. Once you've figured out the distance to the target, you have two options. The first, most simple way to account for bullet drop in your shooting is to aim just a bit higher than the target. Once you fire, you can continue to hold down the scope button until you see where the bullet lands. If it hits too low, just aim a bit higher. And if it lands too far, aim a bit lower. Pretty simple. This method works very well up to a certain range, but it becomes pretty complicated to perform consistently beyond maybe 400 meters or so. If the target is extremely far away, you might want to use one of the cool features of modern Battlefield games where you can dial in the known distance to re-zero the middle of your crosshair to account for that longer range. For example, if a target is about 500 meters away, you can dial in 500 meters using the button for your scope zeroing. Then do the same correction of aiming just a bit higher or lower to micro adjust these distances depending on if the target's a bit closer or further than your zero range that you have set on the scope. Once you get the process down, you'll be nailing enemies at insane ranges. It's really so satisfying to pull off. Personally, I don't bother with weapon zeroing until the target's at least 300 meters away. Within that range, it's pretty easy to just make a slight adjustment manually by aiming a bit higher than normal. I think overall this is a good approach because you can aim at targets at a variety of distances without needing to mess with that scope zeroing. When it comes to leading your target, this one is unfortunately a bit less straightforward to calculate, and you're going to need to develop a sense of timing in the game through a lot of practice. My advice again is to go for high bullet speed snipers to make this job a bit easier on yourself. If you're trying to hit a fast moving target with a slow bullet speed, it's going to be a tough job. One method that I found to be helpful while calibrating the feel of leading your targets is to practice in the Battlefield 4 test range with your favorite sniper of choice. You can aim ahead of each target that moves at different speeds and practice until you can consistently hit each moving target without missing. Once you have a feel for this in the test range, try it out on the battlefield, especially against a variety of moving targets at different speeds. You can practice hitting vehicles, enemies on the run, walking enemies, and over time you'll internally calibrate how much you need to aim ahead of the target based on your distance to the target and how fast it's moving. Outside of suppressors and rangefinders, there are a few other attachments that can really impact how effective you are on the battlefield. First, let's talk about optics. In Battlefield 4, you have three categories of weapon sights: low zoom, medium zoom, and high zoom. Aiming down sights with anything in the high zoom category will immediately show a scope glint from the enemy's point of view. The same is true in Battlefield 1 and 5 with the higher magnification sniper scopes. For this reason, if you're using a longer range optic, I would highly recommend not aiming down sights any longer than you need to in order to acquire your target and hit the shot. When I see an enemy sniper in the distance showing off that scope glint, my eyes light up because I know it's basically a free kill for me if I can correctly judge how far away they are. When you're sniping with these longer range optics, it's much better to use something like the PLD or even just your hipfire view to visually acquire the target first, then center your crosshair as close as you can to the target, scope in, and make a small correction to hit the shot. Then you want to immediately unscope unless you're trying to measure the bullet drop. Doing so will minimize the time that you're showing your scope glint to the enemy, which will draw less aggression towards you. In Battlefield 4, there are a couple long-range scopes that can make sniping at extreme ranges much easier. For example, there's the 20 times or even 40 times magnification. However, for most of your regular sniping in the game, the longest that you'll probably want to use is the 8 times rifle scope. I also really like the 14 times variable zoom attachment because you can either increase the magnification from the 6 times or 8 times scope, or you can decrease the magnification if you're using either the 20 or 40 times scope. It's a really nice way to have some options to choose the right magnification level on the fly without needing to redeploy and change your loadout. I do often use the straight pull bolt attachment so that you can shoot a second shot without needing to stop aiming down sights, but I try to never stay scoped in any longer than I need to. Staying scoped in too long is probably the #1 mistake that new sniper players make while learning to improve. We'll cover more on that topic in a bit. The mid-range scopes are awesome because they give you some magnification without showing off that scope glint. These are a go-to option for me in many close quarter sniping engagements because you seem to pose less of a threat to the enemy when they can't see that sniper scope glint, which will have less opponents looking your way. The same rule applies for lower magnification scopes in Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 5 as well. If you can manage to aim well with these optics, you'll stick out much less on the battlefield, which gives you more time to line up your shots. You also have some cool options in Battlefield 4 like the IR/NV and FLIR scopes that can help you with seeing in dark conditions or through smoke grenades, particularly in more meat grinder scenarios like Operation Locker or Metro. I personally don't use the bipod all that often unless I'm going for some extremely long range sniping because it often deploys when I don't even intend to use it, and again, my goal with sniping is to move quickly and not expose myself to danger any more than I need to. Bipods are slow and clunky, and I find that most of the time it's better to just quickly scope in, press your button to hold a breath, and take your shot. By the way, my understanding is that holding your breath isn't actually required for your bullet to be accurate in Battlefield 4, but instead it just makes it easier to line up your shot by removing the scope sway. Please let me know in the comments if you know this to be different, but I find that I really only need to use the hold breath keybind for more medium to long range shots, and I don't really bother with them for the closer range ones. There are a few important things to know about accuracy with your sniper rifle that impacts your ability to land shots even if you have perfect aim. The first is inaccuracy caused by movement. In Battlefield 4, if you're moving while shooting, especially while sniping, you're going to miss most of your shots thanks to the weapon spread stat that gets applied while you're moving. The faster you're moving, the more intense the spread becomes, and the more likely that your shot will miss the target. While sniping, the spread effect is often enough to make you miss the shot if you're not close enough to the target that you're shooting at. There's also an effect called suppression that happens when an enemy shoots near your head. I won't go into extreme detail on exactly how this works because frankly, it's pretty complicated. Instead, I'll link to a great article on sim.gg that explains how this suppression effect works in detail. The TLDR version is that if you're under the effects of suppression, you're hit with extra bullet spread that works like an accuracy penalty on your weapon. This can cause you to miss your shot, even if you're aiming perfectly. For this reason, it's often better to get back to cover, wait for the suppression effect to end, and then peek from a different angle if someone's still shooting at you. Next up, let's talk about target selection and where you should try to land your shots, because this can actually have quite a large impact on your outgoing damage. Generally speaking, as a sniper, you want to be patient and aim for a headshot to secure a kill, but this is actually not true 100% of the time. As you can see on screen, snipers in Battlefield 4 deal 100 damage up to about 10 to 15 meters in distance from the target. This damage is multiplied in different ways depending on where you hit the target and how they have their loadout configured. If you land your shot as a headshot, you'll get a damage multiplier of 2.35, so you're guaranteed that that shot will be a kill at any range except for a few oddballs like the Scout Elite that have a lower damage drop-off floor. If you happen to land that same shot in the stomach or legs, or to the chest or arms against an opponent who has the defensive spec option in their customization, your outgoing damage will be modified by a 0.93 multiplier, which means that you're not landing a kill against a full health enemy even at point blank range. Luckily, Battlefield does have a mechanic called assist counts as kill, where if you deal enough damage and then someone finishes the target off, you'll still get credit for that kill since you did most of the work. At medium ranges against mostly stationary targets, it's always best to go for a headshot if you have the opportunity. But if you're seeing other snipers aiming your way, it's best to go for a quick shot and land whatever you can and then move so you're not stationary yourself. Battlefield 5 works mostly the same way as Battlefield 4, except that even in point blank range, most snipers will not one-shot kill to the body except for some oddities like the boy's anti-material rifle. However, Battlefield 1 is quite different. Most snipers have a sweet spot mechanic where they can deal lethal damage for a hit to the upper body at a particular range. Each sniper has a different starting and ending range where this is possible, except for a few that can't kill in a single body shot at any range. Again, I would look at the sim.gg website and see which snipers can deal a one-shot kill to the body. Whether you're killing with a body shot or a headshot, not every target is created equally. You want to prioritize enemy kills based on their level of threat. If you're fighting enemies 200 meters away and one of them is a sniper with a scope glint pointing in your direction, you better focus on killing that enemy sniper first instead of the regular infantry players who don't pose much of a threat at that distance. In closer range battles, you want to be smart about your target selection. Did you ever play any of the stealth-based games like Splinter Cell, where killing one target who's seen by another one can draw some unwanted attention towards you? In Battlefield, you want to have the same mindset if you have the opportunity. You take out targets in an order where the enemies aren't alerted by you killing their ally. This takes some time to learn, and it's definitely a more advanced tip, but it's something to be thinking about as you progress with your sniping ability. Playing your position wisely is vital to your success as a sniper, which is why I'd like to give you a couple of extra tips on how to play around cover most effectively. As a sniper, it's your goal to always have cover available to use while fighting. You don't have an assault rifle, so if an enemy notices you and starts pushing your way, cover will become your best friend, so you can use that cover to peek out and shoot and then retreat behind cover in between shots. Learning how to manage your angles and play effectively around cover is one of the main things that separates new players from the very experienced ones in Battlefield. To simplify things, you want to peek out from cover, stop for a moment to regain your accuracy by letting the spread penalty fade, potentially hold your breath if you need to steady your scope, and then shoot. If you're being suppressed, you want to try to repeat this pattern after it fades and potentially peek from a different angle so you don't get suppressed immediately again. This all happens so fast with good players, but it's important to understand each of the components in order to become more consistent. In Battlefield 4, the penalty to your accuracy from moving is more noticeable, so if the target's pretty far away, you definitely want to come to a full stop before shooting. In Battlefield 1 and 5, this movement penalty is less severe, so you can sometimes get away with shooting while you're on the move. Outside of the suppression mechanic, it's also important to not peek from the same angle or position over and over again because you become way too predictable. Good players will notice these spots and quickly check them if you start to repeat the same habits. For example, some of the easiest kills against other snipers are when I find players who love to camp in towers or on top of buildings. I can quickly scan an area like this, spot them, and essentially get a free kill because of their predictable behavior. Having high ground can be very helpful while sniping, but it's also a high risk, high reward trade-off, so you need to be smart about how you move and focus on not becoming too easy of a target. A few other thoughts on positioning that might help you out are to stay towards the outer lanes of a map while scanning for targets from the outer edges towards the middle. If you're a sniper playing from the dead center of a map, you're exposed to significantly more angles compared to when you play around the edges. Especially if you're using one of those longer range optics that gives away your position, you're going to be getting a lot of unwanted attention. I also find it helpful to stay slightly away from other friendly players on my team. Teammates have a habit of drawing attention to themselves as well as blocking your shots by standing in front of you, so as a sniper, it's often best to take some less congested angles and lanes. Speaking of having your shots blocked, in Battlefield you also need to be sure that your gun has enough clearance from the cover you're hiding behind to actually hit the target. Many new players will be confused because their bullets seem to be disappearing in mid-air. What's actually happening is that the wall you're hiding behind is blocking your shot, and you need to move a bit so the bullet can actually reach your intended target. Next up, I want to talk about one of the most influential factors towards your sniping success, your aim and how you can work on improving it. The advice here varies a bit depending on if you're playing with mouse and keyboard or controller, but a lot of it's applicable regardless of your input method. The first tip here is to take full advantage of the test range. This is such a helpful resource to have built right into the game. You can practice your timing of how much to lead your targets based on how fast they're moving, how far you are from the target, and which sniper you're using. The less obvious way to use the test range though is to practice your target switching and flicking onto targets. When getting comfortable with whatever sensitivity you choose, you can do a drill where you aim off of the target and then flick onto the target and shoot. Doing this enough times from enough different angles and distances will help you to calibrate your in-game sensitivity and hit those shots under pressure in a real game environment. I'm also a huge fan of external aim training, especially for mouse and keyboard players. This is a topic that I'm really passionate about, and if you'd like to see me create a full guide on aim training for Battlefield, please let me know in the comments and I'll start working on one soon. Without going into crazy depth here, mastering both your tracking aim and clicking aim is essential for becoming a good sniper in Battlefield. I personally use Kovacs 2.0 the meta for my aim training, but you can find similar drills for free in AimLab as well. In your training time, you want to have a nice mix of fast-paced clicking like one wall 6 targets TE and one wall 9,000 targets, some precision clicking against smaller targets like one wall 6 targets small, one wall 4 targets small voltaic, and wide wall 3 targets voltaic. I also really like Valorant small flicks for working on those micro corrections. And don't worry, I'll put all of these in the description. For practice against moving targets, you have some really great options like one wall 5 targets pasu, floating heads timing 400%, and Vox target switch click. And for tracking, this will help you to keep up with those fast moving objects like vehicles. There are so many good ones, but I would recommend spending some time on Fugla XYZ Voltaic, Ground Plaza Voltaic, and Smooth Bod Voltaic just to start out. There are also easy variants of many of these scenarios if you feel the originals are a bit too hard for your current aiming level. Again, I can't possibly do justice to the value of aim training in an already long video like this one, but if you're interested in a full guide, please let me know. Your mileage with aim training on a controller may vary since controller turn speed is affected by the reticle friction that's imparted from aim assist, but in theory, I think it could still be useful for developing your thumb dexterity on the sticks. There are also a few settings that you may want to consider adjusting to get the most out of the game. When it comes to sensitivity, the more I learn about aim training, the more I believe that basically any sensitivity can work as long as it's comfortable for the user. However, if you're looking for a good starting point on mouse and keyboard, I would recommend starting somewhere around 5 to 15% sensitivity at 800 DPI. If you're on a different DPI, just multiply these values accordingly. For example, if you dropped down to 400 DPI, you would just multiply by 2. For controllers, I've seen great sniper players on both high and low sensitivity, and I really think it's mostly a matter of personal preference. But there are some benefits to lower sensitivity for fine adjustments, especially at longer ranges. I personally use the Uniform Soldier Aiming setting, or USA, which attempts to make the game feel like it has roughly the same sensitivity no matter what optic magnification level that you're using. You can switch from hipfire to a 1-time sight or an 8-time sight with basically the same feeling in game. I have my USA coefficient set to the default value of 133, and it's turned on in the settings. You can also change the soldier zoom sensitivity to be higher or lower based on your preference, although I prefer to keep it at 100%. This is the setting that changes how sensitive the game feels when you're aiming down sights. Finally, this isn't specific to sniping per se, but in Battlefield 4, you have the ability to scale your minimap to be larger, and I highly recommend that you do so. This makes seeing threats nearby much easier and it may save your life in the game. I also like to keep the minimap indicators on the larger side to make them easier to see as well. As a recon player, you have a ton of useful gadgets to make your life easier. These help not only yourself as a sniper, but also your teammates nearby. I'm not going to cover all of them in detail, but I wanted to point out the most useful ones for sniping. We've already mentioned the PLD a few times, and I can't stress enough how useful this thing is as a sniper. I'll often run this gadget to easily visually identify targets at range with the night vision goggles, and then mark them with my spot button, and switch to my sniper to get an easy kill. It picks up so many enemies that otherwise would blend right into the background. One tip that you might not realize is that you can zoom in to increase the magnification on the PLD with the same button that you normally use to turn on or off your laser sight or toggle the magnification on the variable zoom scope. C4 is pretty obvious but incredibly helpful. It's your main source of protection against vehicles that might choose to push up on your position. As a sniper, you often feel completely helpless against tanks, for example, but C4 can level the playing field. C4 also works really well as an extra frag grenade when groups of enemies are nearby. If you spot a few on the minimap, just throw a C4 brick out there and detonate it right away, and you'll often get some free kills. The motion sensor balls are excellent for close range sniping. These little guys will detect enemy movement within a 25-meter radius and report them to your team for 24 seconds after deploying. In CQB fighting, I'm throwing these little things around me all the time. Knowing your enemy's position gives you an incredible advantage, and it makes it much easier to decide what to do next. In the same vein, you can use the tug system to detect enemy movement within the same range as the motion sensors. Once you place it, the tug system is permanent until it gets destroyed by an enemy, so it lasts potentially a lot longer, but you do have to physically stand wherever you want to deploy it, which can be a problem for close quarters fighting. Personally, I think the choice of which of these two gadgets to use comes mostly down to how you want to be playing. If you're going for an aggressive playstyle with a lot of moving around, the motion sensors are really nice because you can throw them to the next area that you plan to attack just before you get there. If you're trying to defend a particular area and you plan to stay there for a while, on the other hand, the tug system makes a lot of sense because of its permanent nature. The MAV is also an interesting tool, especially for spotting snipers who are hiding high up on rooftops. Watch this clip in the background where my friend Sides uses the MAV to spot snipers on top of buildings through the smoky air and gets a really nice sniper kill. The SoFlame is also a neat gadget, but not really super applicable for sniping gameplay. It's a great team play focused gadget to help with laser painting vehicles, which can be a huge help for your team, especially if your opponents are relentless with the helicopters. The radio beacon is every rooftop camper's favorite toy. You can use it to set a specific respawn point so that you can return to a particular part of the map that may be otherwise difficult to access. One extra tip here is that if you place your beacon somewhere in the open, you'll tend to parachute in, but if you place it under a ceiling, you'll tend to spawn right next to it. Finally, the Claymore is probably the most iconic gadget for snipers. You're pretty much guaranteed to come across one of these if you're chasing a sniper who took high ground on a tower or a building. The most obvious way to use these is to put them somewhere behind you to cover your flank, though how you position them can make a big difference. Ideally, you want to set them up so that enemies don't have the chance to see the wires coming out of them before reacting to them. This means that you're placing them around sharp corners and on top of ledges to make them most effective. I'll also commonly use claymores just around common lanes of a map where there's a lot of foot traffic. If you hide them well enough, you're almost guaranteed to get a kill sooner or later. One final loadout tip is to use the sniper field upgrade option in your soldier customization. You start out with a bonus to how long you can hold your breath, which is super useful, and as you level up as a squad, you'll earn some great bonuses like decreasing incoming suppression, having enemies lose their spot on you faster, and increasing the time that the enemies that you spot are marked. If you're using a bolt action rifle as your primary weapon, you're going to be in big trouble in close quarters when fighting multiple enemies due to the slow firing nature of your sniper. For this reason, it's essential to master your sidearm as a recon player. A good pistol shot can get you out of some seriously bad situations, and luckily sidearms in Battlefield can be really powerful with good aim. The first tip I have for you is to fire your sidearm in hipfire mode, probably more often than you think you should. Hipfire accuracy on Battlefield pistols is remarkably good, and in Battlefield 4 you can even add a laser sight to make it better. Hip-firing your pistol is great because it allows you to have faster movement around the map, which makes you a harder target to hit, and it also doesn't have a drastic impact on your bullet spread. If you're in fairly close range, you should be able to still hit a majority of your shots while you're hip-firing. In Battlefield 4, my favorite sidearms to pair with the sniper are the Deagle and the Glock 18. The Deagle is a powerhouse of a weapon that can kill an enemy up close with a single headshot or 2 body shots. A good aimer with a Deagle is a huge threat in close quarters. The Glock 18 is sort of on the other end of the spectrum, where it fires in full auto and it can absolutely melt an enemy up close at 900 RPM. Even if you only land body shots at point blank range, you'll still require only 5 hits, resulting in a blistering fast time to kill. For Battlefield 1, by far my favorite sidearm is the Mars Automatic, which has amazing hipfire accuracy and damage. This thing is a joy to use. In Battlefield 5, I would definitely recommend the Revolver, which is a fantastic sidearm and capable of landing some consistent hipfire kills with good aim. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments. A thumbs up rating is always appreciated as well. I have some raw sniping gameplay that you might enjoy as well. It's a video shown on the top right of your screen and also linked in the description.